Have you ever wondered what lies within the mind of a being who knows no bounds to their ambition? How does an individual become the epitome of tyranny? Not due to past scars, but an insatiable quest for power and control. Prepare for a journey that will unravel the psychological complexities of one of the universe's greatest adversaries. And that might forever change your perception of how dominance originates. In the vast and diverse cosmos of Dragon Ball Z, the figure of FRIEZA emerges not as a creature from an oppressed background or a troubled past, but as an intrinsic element of a lineage of conquerors. FRIEZA's initial situation is that of an heir, born and raised in an environment where power was the most valuable currency and domination, the very purpose of life. His family, a dynasty of individuals with extraordinary combat abilities, had already paved a path of cosmic subjugation. This context, where brute force was celebrated and compassion seen as weakness, served as the cradle for his mentality. FRIEZA's environment was not one of deprivation, but of an excess of power and influence, where he was the center of a universe of subjugation. From an early age, he was immersed in a culture of superiority, where the lives of other species were viewed as disposable on planets, mere resources to be exploited. The first psychological trait that manifests in FRIEZA is a pronounced pathological narcissism. He possesses an unwavering belief in his own greatness and a constant need for admiration. FRIEZA sees himself as the most superior life form in the universe, and anyone who dares to question this view is quickly silenced. This distorted self-perception leads him to believe that his actions, however severe, are justified. He acts not out of revenge or trauma, but from an innate sense of entitlement to rule and subjugate. His privileged upbringing, free from significant challenges or adversities, solidified this egocentric view. He never had to fight to prove his worth, as it was granted to him from birth. The absence of limits and the constant presence of flattery created fertile ground for his personality to develop without ethical or moral restraints. But there was something no one saw coming. For FRIEZA, the concept of rupture doesn't align with trauma or a painful experience in the traditional sense. His trigger wasn't a personal crisis, but rather the emergence of something he perceived as a threat to his unquestionable hegemony, the Saiyan race and the legend of the Super Saiyan. This wasn't an event that emotionally shook him, but rather a cold calculation about a potential obstacle to his vision of universal domination. The perception that an underestimated race could eventually produce a being powerful enough to challenge him was what propelled him to act more drastically. His transformation wasn't a change in character, but an intensification of his pre-existing predatory nature. The conflict, for FRIEZA, was purely external. How to efficiently eliminate this potential threat. Internally, there were no moral dilemmas. Only the confirmation of his own coldness and the conviction that he was the only one worthy of holding supreme control. Psychology would explain this transformation not as a metamorphosis of his personality, but as the amplified manifestation of an antisocial personality disorder characterized by a complete lack of empathy and a disregard for social norms and the rights of others. He doesn't care about the lives or suffering of other beings. They are merely pieces on his cosmic chessboard. The eradication of the Saiyans was an act of strategic precaution, a move to ensure his absolute control and eliminate any shadow of doubt about his superiority. He saw it as a necessary cleansing, a way to prevent future setbacks. And that's where everything started to fall apart. For others, FRIEZA's mind doesn't distort. It molds itself into a relentless structure of power and calculated cruelty. His actions and words reveal a mind that operates with a disturbing internal logic. Domination is the only law. He openly expresses his pleasure in seeing others suffer, not as an emotional outburst, but as an affirmation of his own supremacy. When he destroys entire planets or inflicts pain upon his subordinates, there isn't a shred of remorse. For FRIEZA, life is a tool and pain a means to an end. To delve into Frieza's mind, we can use the analogy of psychopathy. This is not a mental illness in the sense of hallucinations or delusions, but a persistent pattern of antisocial behavior, manipulation, and a complete lack of remorse or empathy. Individuals with psychopathic traits are often charming, intelligent, and calculating, which perfectly fits Frieza's persona. He is capable of smiling while inflicting the greatest suffering because there is no emotional connection to the consequences of his actions. His pleasure derives from the demonstration of his power and the humiliation of his adversaries. He is a master of intimidation and psychological terror, using his aura of invincibility to subdue opponents even before physical combat. His methods are cold and efficient, always aiming for the ultimate result, total control. But the true monster was still dormant. Frieza's act of total transgression is not a single event, but a continuous series of atrocities that solidify his position as a being beyond redemption. The destruction of planet Vegeta, the extermination of the science, and the countless conquests and annihilations of innocent civilizations represent his point of no return. His worldview doesn't change. It reaffirms and intensifies. For him, there is no morality or ethics, only the law of the strongest, and he considers himself the strongest. He rationalizes his actions as a natural right, a function of his existence. I am the emperor of the universe. Who would dare challenge me? If we look at his logic, we might, for a brief and disturbing moment, wonder, what if he's right? Frieza operates under the premise that absolute power justifies everything. He believes that the universe is a place where only the strongest survive and dominate, and he sees himself as the pinnacle of that hierarchy. This perspective, while terrifying, is internally consistent for him. He doesn't act out of unbridled malice, but from an unwavering belief in his own supremacy and the legitimacy of his power. He views weakness as an invitation to exploitation and compassion as a mistake. His ethics are those of the supreme predator. The unsettling question that remains is, if a being possesses unlimited power, what prevents them from exercising that power unchecked? And what does that say about the nature of power itself? Delving deeper into the psychological analysis, Frieza's behavior can be understood through the lens of a narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial traits. This is not madness in the sense of a loss of contact with reality, but a rigid and maladaptive personality structure. He is extremely self-centered, with an excessive need for admiration, a lack of empathy, and an arrogance that borders on delusions of grandeur. His logic of destruction is not chaotic. It is precisely calculated. Every action of Frieza aims to consolidate his dominance and eliminate any potential challenge. Comparing him to real-world cases, individuals with similar behavioral patterns often exhibit keen intelligence and a capacity to manipulate and deceive, which Frieza demonstrates in his interactions. He is a master of dissimulation and veiled cruelty. His behavior is validated by the absence of significant consequences for his actions during most of his existence, reinforcing the idea that his tactics work. He feels no guilt or remorse, which makes him incredibly dangerous. The universe is his playground, and he is the child who never learned to share. The shocking revelation isn't that he's an uncontrolled madman. It's that it wasn't madness. It was cold calculation. What remains after Frieza's passage are devastated planets, subjugated civilizations, and terror spreading across galaxies. His legacy is not one of construction, but of dismantlement and oppression. He shapes the universe around him through fear and submission. The consequences of his actions reverberate throughout the Dragon Ball Z narrative, with characters like Goku and Vegeta being directly affected by his tyranny. The destruction of planet Vegeta, for example, is an event that defines Vegeta's journey and Goku's rise. The philosophical reflection that emerges from Frieza's figure is about the nature of power unchecked and the responsibility that comes with it. Who are we to judge a being who acts strictly within their own logic of domination? The answer is complex, for while his actions are devastating, they are consistent with his psychological structure. He doesn't see himself as a villain, but as the natural sovereign. The conclusion of FRIEZA's myth is not a definitive end. Even after his defeat, the shadow of his legacy persists, and he, somehow, always finds a way back, reaffirming that perhaps ... he wasn't the last. The cycle of oppression and challenge seems to repeat, perhaps even with other beings who share his insatiable quest for control. And so, we've peeled back the layers of FRIEZA's mind. Not a being corrupted by trauma, but one who personifies the relentless pursuit of power and the sadistic pleasure in subjugation. He forces us to question, to what extent can the absence of limits and the belief in one's own superiority mold a tyrant? His story leaves us with a dark reflection. In a vast and unpredictable universe, the true threat isn't always chaos, but the cold, relentless order imposed by a mind that knows no compassion. FRIEZA's terror wasn't an uncontrolled outburst of rage, but the cold and calculating manifestation of an iron will.